All right, you were talking about how baby has no routine.
Yeah, because so since he was born, we were like 4 weeks pre-games, maybe 4 or 5 weeks. And Michelle's parents were here helping out. So it was nice. Like we had an extra set or two of hands on deck to sort of help out. So I was kind of like not super involved in the day-to-days on that. We just had extra people like to walk the dog and change the diapers and do all the little things. So then it was like, since then he's basically been had a chaotic existence, like as chaotic as ours has been, right? That we traveled to the US and came back for the games. And then immediately after that, we had a friend visiting for a little bit. Then we drove to Alberta and back to visit my family and go to a wedding, which is like, a 12 to 14-hour drive. We had to drive through the forest fires to get home. So it was like an extra bunch of time because we got detoured. And so he just like hasn't had normal baby life where it's like, you get down for your nap at like in the morning and one in the afternoon and whatever. And so since we've been home now kind of 5 days, we've tried to make a little more concerted effort to do little things like that. And it actually makes quite a big difference. Like, he's generally a little bit of a happier baby. He's got a little more positive affect when he's well rested and when he's eaten, like all of us, right?
Yeah,
So it's
you can control the you can control his happiness a little bit better by just like giving him a little bit of structure, like any bit of structure.
Yeah, and we've kind of lacked that for the last bit, and I feel like we've brushed off saying like, oh, it's good. Like he's gonna be trained to be very flexible and adaptable, right? Like we're not gonna, and I think in general that is kind of what we want, is to not have our lives revolve around like snack time, nap time, like everything. Like we want to do the things that we still enjoy and the things that we want to do, and like he's just gonna come along. Like I'll strap him to my desk and we'll go do the things that we want to do, right? Like we don't want our lives to completely changed to revolve around him. But I do think, yeah, like you're saying, like a little bit of attention to those things actually goes a long way. And so because the last 5 weeks has been or like 4 weeks has been a bit chaotic and a bit about like our needs and the things that we're doing and organizing stuff for our wedding and whatever. Um, just this last like less than a week of just paying a little bit more attention to that stuff, it's actually remarkable the amount of things you can get done and how much I appreciate the like 2 hour window when he's just having a nap and I'm like, I've got both my hands free and I'm like, holy shit, like I can get so much done in this two
Yeah.
hours. Like you can really sink your teeth into things, whereas before we were just we were kind of handing them back and forth and somebody had to be holding them because otherwise he'd fuss. And so a little bit of a learning curve. And like I said, I think in general our goal is to make sure that he is quite flexible and you can sort of put him down at any time or pass him off or put him to sleep if he needs to, and you can continue or just take him wherever you want. Bring him to the games where it's nice and loud for like when he's 6 weeks old, probably will help him to be not worried about noise and things like that. But yeah, we've been enjoying a little bit of a structure since we've been home, like our first taste of it. He's almost 11 weeks old now, and it's kind of like the first taste of routine that we've had in that 11 weeks.
I love you just touched on like a dozen different things that I wanted to ask you about because
Cool, let's dig into it.
I so my wife and I just had our baby. He's about 6 weeks this week. And like we don't have quite as much chaos in our day-to-day, but like he was born basically the week of the games. So I
Oh
tried
yeah,
to
okay.
work that entire week with like a 3-day old or a 4-day old in our house and trying to kind of doing like a couple hours at a time watching the games and doing commentary and stuff and then going back and forth and helping my wife. And we're also kind of trying to build a little bit more of like a resilience into him so like he can just be a little more flexible for when we like to travel, we like to go places, we like to do things, we want to bring him along with us so that he also experiences those things. And like my family, not everyone, but like the prior generation, like my parents, uncles, and like my friends' parents, like that prior generation, that entire group of friends, everyone is like, oh my God, like you have to have this structure. You have to put them down for this. You can't burp them too hard. You can't feed them more than this. You have to make sure they sleep here. You can't let them wake up here. You can't. And it's like, no, 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 no. like that, those rules are out the window. Like we're in the 21st century, and this baby is going to have to be used to like a much different world than the world like you may have raised us in, or like you may have been raised in. And I think that sort of
Right.
like rigidity like completely was thrown out the window once our generation started having kids. Like all my friends that have kids, they can't have any of that rigidity because we all work, we all have different priorities, we all are trying to like keep our relationships alive at the same time. It's like, the horror show of like we have a kid and then the relationship completely tanks into like a loveless nothing where you're just like trying to keep a child alive, is like a nightmare, I think, for a lot of our generation, and is something that a lot of people are trying to avoid. Like, did you find any pushback of like the flexibility that you had to build into your schedule, or was everybody just kind of real supportive and there for it?
Yeah, I have a couple, yeah, like a couple things that I want to touch on that. So I work in clinic and I treat patients all the time. And you make general conversation with people, right? Like I have people in for 20 to 30-minute visits sometimes, and you just make small talk, right? And that's a big change in your life. Like, what's new? Had a baby, and like everybody's got something to tell you, right? You go get groceries when Michelle was pregnant, like everybody's got something to say about it. Oh, did you figure out the sex? Oh, you should or should not have done that. Whatever my opinion is, blah, here you go, right?
Yeah, suddenly just
Everybody
vomiting it
shares.
onto your life. Yeah.
Suddenly everybody's got advice for you, right? And so I don't know. I think that there are things you can take from people, but one of the cool things that I think you kind of touched on is there's just a generational difference, right? Um, I love that no one knows what the fuck they're doing. I find it like kind of charming in a way that it's that there are pieces of information that transcend generation and that are important no matter what, certainly. But I think that there is a certain thing that needs to be appreciated, that like either your social and cultural reality changes every generation. So like the things that were true raising me are not going to be true raising Owen. The things that were true when my dad was a kid, when my grandpa was a kid, like it's just different every time. And even between those generations, like the gap between, my dad and I are 30 years apart. Like that, if you were born right in the middle there, 15 years, completely different. Like the context that you're raised in is changing, the world is changing, and so you can't not change with it. I think that to realize that is super important. So once you can kind of wrap your head around that, it's like I feel totally comfortable like kind of waving off certain advice and being like, you don't know what you're talking about. And just there are certain things I think it's good to listen to it, and whether or not I like physically do that or tell them like, hey, look, I'm not going to take that advice, whatever, you can smile and be like, nod your head, and then go home and be like, I think most of that I'm just going to leave at the door. I think that that's totally acceptable. And like it's important to realize that like it is a different experience every generation. And so you don't know, and nobody knows. So it's like it doesn't need to be scary. Like nobody knows. You're helping each other out. Everybody leans on each other. Like you have friends around the same age having kids. Like, boy, like let's figure this out together, right? So I think there really is a communal sense of that. But I think that's what's kind of fun about it is, my parents give me some advice and I listen to them on some things, and some things I'm like, hey, look, it's just different now. And that's just the reality. And the other thing is like on the sleeping thing, the rigidity. I had a few patients tell me this when we just got talking about kids, and um, one particularly that I remember listening to, and they're like, there was an older gentleman and his daughter was having kids and they were on their second. And he's like, the first kid they had, he was kind of the opposite. He said when they had her, they were super flexible about whatever. Like they would travel a lot, did lots of things, brought the kids everywhere. They were trying to kind of instill that flexibility in them. And then when his daughter started having kids, their first one, they were super strict about like, sleep time, this time, like their schedule. They wouldn't go visit people. They'd have to leave at certain times because they got to make nap time at a certain time. And it was just like, dominated their lives. And he was always very like, man, I don't know about that. Like, we'll see. And then he said when they had their second, they quickly realized that baby number one doesn't respect the rules. So it's like suddenly you've got a 2-year-old and now you've got a newborn. and it try to tell the 2-year-old that a 2-year-old has to be quiet or do whatever because it's newborn's nap time, it's newborn snack time, da, 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 da. Like this whirlwind that's running around the living room, like doesn't give a shit about your like your little structure that you put in. And then years later, baby number 2 is now much more resilient and flexible with different things, with parameters, than the baby who had all the strict parameters put around its daily conditions. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And he's like, as a granddad, the guy was like, yeah, it was like a really proud, you could tell he was beaming, like a really proud I told you so moment
Oh, for
to
sure.
his daughter.
There's like
But
a
he,
pettiness to it almost, right? You like, you
yeah,
don't want to
yeah,
see it be negative, but there's like a pettiness to like, yeah, I probably could have predicted that was going to happen. Like the schedule with a toddler and an infant is a house of cards. Like there's
totally.
literally nothing that's going to keep it structurally sound.
Totally. And that's the thing. Like, I don't know. My younger brother now, he just had a newborn and his partner has a 2-year-old. So they're living the like chaos. And we went home to visit and saw them a little bit. And it was like, yeah, I can tell that's going to be exhausting. Right. So I can totally see this guy's point of being like, good luck with that one. If you're going to try to maintain that, it's going to take even more energy than it did to try to do it with the one, because you got to try to quell this other demon in the house. And it's just, yeah, anyway, I thought that was kind of a reasonable point, and I thought, that's, if you're planning on having multiple kids, it might be very difficult to try to structure things in that way. And because you might be fighting a losing battle, and I think then if you get really frustrated, it doesn't help anything, right? If you're like chippy with each other, with you and your partner, and then you start to get like snippy with your 2-year-old, like they don't know, like like it doesn't help, I'm sure, right? So
Yeah.
anyway, I thought that, yeah, those 2 points were very very interesting. So I agree with some of that, and we're doing our best to, it's still so early, and this is the thing, right? Like I'm sure you can relate, like we don't know, like I don't, and we're doing our best, but I'm not the first guy that's going to give people advice either, because we're still trying to figure it out. And I think everybody's conditions are just different, right?
Yeah.
We're really lucky. Michelle has time that she can take on mat leave. I have very flexible work between the clinic and just training. Like I can do my training any old time. And nowadays I have to be a little more prepared to do that. So it just, we're very fortunate. And I think our experience is maybe going to be different than a lot of people, but yeah, it makes you, yeah, you definitely, I have a different respect for families when I see them tugging 3 kids through the airport and stuff like that now.